Hello, my name is Toby Sisson, and welcome to another event in the Arts Worcester Speakers Series, Black Art, Collecting and Being Collected. We're in conversation today with three experts on collecting Black art. Our goal is to increase the visibility, understanding, and appreciation of Black art and artists in our communities. Thank you all for joining us. Our host and sponsor, Arts Worcester, is an organization that has engaged artists and the public to advance and celebrate contemporary art for over 40 years. Today's guests are Valerie Cooper, appraiser and founding partner of Picture That, a fine art consulting firm based in Stamford, Connecticut. Najee Dorsey, artist, founder, and CEO of Black Art in America. Black Art in America is a multifaceted arts company based in Georgia. Since 2010, its mission has been to document, preserve, and promote the contributions of African-American arts, of the African-American arts community. Gloria Hall, public arts administrator, preservationist, and private collector based in Worcester, Massachusetts. Thanks to each of you for bringing your expertise and unique perspective to this conversation, Black art, collecting and being collected. In my role as moderator, I'll facilitate the conversation with questions for our guests about their work building private collections for individuals and corporations, forging relationships with artists, and beginning a personal art collection of one's own. If time permits, we'll try to take a few questions from the audience towards the end of the hour. Please post them in the chat section, and if we're unable to address your questions today, they will help inform future conversations. Let's start with a broad question for Valerie Cooper about the multiple roles you have as a fine art consultant, particularly engaged with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please share with our audience a bit about the range of work you do and how that involves artists from diverse backgrounds.
Awesome. Well, first of all, Toby and Juliet and team, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be a part of the panel this evening. Being an art consultant means you wear many hats. And for Picture That, we have been around now. This is our 19th year that I've actually run the consulting practice full-time. I actually started the company as a part-time sort of side hustle, if you will, back in '92. I was a fine art distributor for a company called Top Tier out of New Jersey. Used to book numerous home art shows. And I grew the practice to a point where I allowed it to sort of cannibalize my full-time Wall Street career because I was generating income. And so 19 years now as a consultant, one of the things that I decided to do, having had the home-based business, having had an art gallery, was really form a business that was a consulting practice focused on institutions. So my clients are primarily corporations, healthcare organizations, and academic institutions as well. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, today, obviously, based on all the things we're hearing and reading about, but also back in the late 80s, was one of the focal points that I had an opportunity to work on while at Goldman Sachs. And it was sort of the impetus for what led me to form Picture That full time. The firm had recently gone public, and there was a need to help promote awareness of difference throughout the company worldwide. And I was a software development VP running technology teams globally. And I got the tap to, come offline and help the firm create the very first diversity initiative for our division, which was a technology division. I was a collector at the time, and I knew the power of art. I knew that art was worth 1,000 words. And so in sort of deciding how my role would form, it was a brand new role, and it especially diversity was new for Wall Street firms during that time. One of the things I felt would help me be successful was to take the firm's art collection and use it as a vehicle to promote awareness of the different categories of people that they had asked me to recruit more of. So using art to promote awareness of African Americans, women, Asians, the LGBT population, it became a thing at Goldman. And it was very, very successful, to the point where I shortly after decided to package that concept and start picture that full time. And so today what I do is what I left to do then is help Fortune 500s, primarily through employee resource groups, promote awareness of difference of difference of culture, of sexual orientation, physical abilities. And we do this all using art. You know, another pretty large focal point is helping firms diversify their traditional art collections so that the works are not necessarily figurative. In fact, most of them aren't figurative, but the artists that we recommend they buy from sort of mirror their employee base or their desired employee base, so that the collection as well is indeed diverse and reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll stop there and yeah, let you ask questions if you have any.
Absolutely, thank you. That's a really good introduction to what you do. So continuing with this introduction to various professional roles within the arts, I have a question for Najee Dorsey. If you could share with us a little bit about the origin story of Black art in America and how your organization connects to Black artists and collectors across the country. How do you make that connection?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me, and welcome everybody. I hope this is informative to everybody that's attending. So, you know, the Black art, what's the Black art in America story? 2005, I moved to Atlanta to pursue my art full time, even though I was creating art as a kid. Went through school, my wife and I was collecting. For 5 years, we were traveling the country, doing art shows, meeting collectors, meeting other artists. And I found myself in Chicago at a dinner table with collectors and artists, and we're talking about some of the same struggles that we generally talk about. You know, lack of representation, you know, connecting with artists and collectors around the country, who's collecting, who's doing what, you know, how come the same handful of artists always get the attention from the mainstream publications? And that's when I had that Obama moment. I said, hey, you know, I know some people that are art educators. I know some people that could help, you know, write some articles, and, you know, let's put a magazine together. So I reached out to a few individuals and said, hey, let's do this. It was the infancy of social media. So I was advised, instead of a traditional magazine page, let's do a social media. And that's when we started Black Art in America. We started with a few articles. I reached out to people that I knew, the database that I currently had. We would change out the site 2-3 times a week, you know, just showing works by other artists, by collectors, you know, what shows were going on around the country. And it just quickly grew. It just grew out of necessity. It was, you know, it was an anomaly. We was in the infancy of social media, but since then, you know, we've grown and we've become a lot more sophisticated over the years. We're in our 11th year. So now, you know, we put out a lot of original content about artists, collectors, the industry. We support podcasts, you know, huge audience on social media. So we're constantly sharing art. We're constantly engaging our audience and growing our audience. We've also produced art shows and events around the country. So it has given people an opportunity to kind of meet and connect with us, you know, let them know that, you know, that we're real, that we are authentically interested in the advancement of African-American visual culture. Sateria, my wife, and I have 26 years. We're avid collectors. We always have artists at the show. Our collector base come out. And so I think people come to where the energy is. And, you know, fortunately, I've been narrow-minded enough or focused enough to really focus on, you know, producing and engaging an audience with things that I'm interested in myself, first and foremost. And you know, it just kind of worked out for us, and we've grown. and we've built an audience of people that's interested in what we do.
That's excellent. I appreciate you talking about how this comes out of your personal relationship and growing this into a company and making those connections. So our local guest, Gloria Hall, has amassed a personal collection of beautiful objects. I see some behind you there in our Zoom. How did you get started collecting, Gloria? And please share a little bit about the motivation maybe behind the very first piece that you purchased and collected.
Thank you for asking me to be a part of this important discussion. I will say it would have been great if there was the Black art in America. I would have had a central location to go to, to find information about Black art. I started collecting, I started collecting because I saw an ad in a magazine about, it was a company in New York that they sold different prints, and they would publish a book, and you would get the book. The first initial thing was in the book. It talked about collecting. It talked about lithograph, just an introduction into how to go about collecting, and they would send out information about prints that you could buy. Now this was it had artists like Moreau. This was in the early 80s, late 1970s.
Mhm.
And, and so I'm like, oh, I really like this. And, and blah, blah, blah. And so I always liked Black culture, of course. I love Black culture. And so I'm like, okay, so are there any Black artists? Or how am I going to find out about any Black artists? I was working on Boylston Street in Boston, and there was a gallery on Boylston Street that was very close to the Copley Square T station. And so I started going in this gallery and talking with the person who was the salesperson, and I said, yeah, I like art. I said, do you ever get any art by any Black folks? And they didn't have any Black folks, but I kept going back. And they had a piece, it was a lithograph by an artist from Brazil. And I bought, that was my first piece. It was collecting an artist. It was a Black artist, but it was a Black artist from Brazil. And that was the first piece. It was a lithograph, was an edition of 300. So yeah, that was my first piece. So yeah, and that's how I got started. There was a really good show that was at the Museum of Fine Arts. It was about, it was decorative art. And so you would get the pottery, the quilts, and it was an introduction to decorative art. And I always kept that in the back of my mind as well. That influenced things later on. My initial one was a painting. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's a really interesting way to think about how to approach it initially. My next question is for Valerie. So what are some of the reasons that your clients, whether they're in organizations or individuals, collect the work of Black artists? What's the motivation for the people that you work with? And I'm very curious about how the marketplace shapes what collectors seek out and perhaps even shapes what Black artists produce. We've lost your...
Yeah, okay, I put myself on mute when others were talking, sorry. That's a great question. So my work primarily is in the institutional side of the business, and the focus, Toby, is exactly on what you initially talked to me about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or at least that's how I started out. It has actually expanded quite a bit since the beginning stages, but that's where primarily I am asked to source works by African-American artists and other artists of color as well. When you think about the diversity composite of people that corporations primarily, and also academic institutions as well, that they focus on, they are looking to include minorities that they are focusing on. In this country, African Americans have largely been the point of focus since the beginning of diversity. In fact, it's one of the primary reasons why diversity initiatives were created, to include African Americans, as well as Asian Americans, as well as Native American, again, special interest group like veterans, et cetera. So your question is specifically about Black artists. And it's because of the focus on diversity overall. Black artists happen to be one of the categories that corporations, again, want to promote more awareness of. And they aren't necessarily seeking figurative art that includes Black people on the canvas, but they want to make sure that when they are acquiring work or when I'm curating work, to promote awareness of the culture. And it's really important to demonstrate the diversity of what Black artists create, abstracts, seascapes, landscapes. And so this gets really interesting when I'm curating for hospitals, because they primarily call for healing themes that depict tranquility, life versus death. So what depicts death? Fall scenes, winter scenes. So we kind of stay away from those scenes. And so one of my missions is to make sure when I'm curating art that includes where the art is actually requested to include healthcare themes. I always present a diverse slate of artists. Why? Because that's the mission of my company, to give voice to the voiceless, right? To make sure there's a seat at the table for minority artists. And there's really not a project that I work on. So the client may not necessarily call for it directly, but if they call for a particular theme, I'm going to serve them up a diverse slate of artists, and then share with them what not only the body of work look like in terms of the art itself, but also what the palette, if you will, or the portfolio of artists are that they just bought from. And they really do appreciate that, because they don't necessarily know how to ask for that often, and asking for art. But for us, it's what makes us different. It's what we do. It's how we're sort of wired. It's how we think. So do I get specifically asked for Black artists? That's rare with institutions, unless it's Black History Month and I'm curating a show for Black History Month, and then I bring up figurative, because you have to make the point. But I also make sure there's, again, diversity of style, to include tapestry, to include abstract, semi-abstract, to include, maybe ceramics, just to show that even though they're Black artists, we do more than paint works of Black people. There's great diversity in terms of style and theme. And, I think Black artists are called for differently if I'm working for a client in London. They want artists who are, yes, Black, but from the countries that reflect their workforce. And it might be Nigeria, it might be Ghana. Black History Month is celebrated in London in October. We had a fabulous tour of the Black art sale that Sotheby's London actually ran, and previewed 10 African artists for the clients in that region. So, is that something that American companies would find of interest? Not so much, because they're not specifically recruiting from African countries, if you will. So I think it's, I think what's sort of fun for me is I have a chance to curate work, to sell work by Black artists that are from a very diverse slate. of countries, of regions that have different styles, and they're not all one, you know, they're not all from a cookie cutter model. They're very different and diverse in terms of the body of Black artists that exist. So hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. You gave us a really good background, a very thorough background on thinking about not just the diversity of the artists themselves, but the diversity of the kinds of artwork they make, and really what the interests of particular collectors might be, and how that changes geographically and various different ways. And sort of following up on that thought as well, Najee, I have a question for you. Since beginning Black art in America in 2010, as you say, it's been 11 years now. How have various artworks evolved to meet this political, social, and economic moment where we are right now? So Valerie told us some really interesting things about what motivates collectors there, but there've been some really big, almost seismic shifts in the way people are thinking about collecting and the world in general. What have you noticed about how various art worlds are receptive to new ideas right now?
Well, the market has definitely grown. I think I would say the largest factors that have played a role will be the advent of social media being one, and the art fairs being two. Social media has basically democratized the industry to a large extent. You know, at any given moment, artists can present work and reach a global audience. You know, the gatekeepers are gone. You know, they don't necessarily have to pack up a portfolio and present it to a gallery. Actually, oftentimes we're finding a lot of galleries, not only of collectors, but a lot of galleries are finding artists via social media. They're adding them to their roster really quick. Collectors are buying, they're actively buying. And I would even throw in the whole component of e-commerce as well. So you've got art fairs that have really taken off. I remember in 2010 making my first track down to Miami Art Basel, and I had a hard time finding, you know, a lot of representation of Black people in that marketplace. And you're talking about $500 million of art being sold in a 1 week period. And so over the course of a decade, that trend has changed. Now you go down there and it's like a family reunion. You've got so many Black people being present. The market has grown. People have seen, you know, prices skyrocket, more representation in galleries, more representations in museum collections, and everybody's interested. I mean, that's what I speak of energy. That's where the energy is. And you throw in the whole component of e-commerce. I remember, you know, when we first launched, within 2 years, we started producing shows around the country, and then we quickly set up our e-commerce. And it was a little slow at first. People feeling comfortable enough to buy fine art online, you know, to spend, you know, a few thousand or several $1,000s online. Well, now it's the norm. It's like, and what has happened, what's transpired in this last year with the pandemic has made it even more accessible for people to, and more comfortable for people to do more shopping of art online, just like Etsy and Amazon and a lot of e-commerce companies. The growth that people were anticipating in a 5 to 10 year period with people buying and shopping online, a lot of that happened just like that in a nanosecond when everybody's stuck at home. So what's changed? Social media, the art fairs, the whole component of e-commerce. I know a lot of artists that lacked, you know, representation or really, you know, the business savvy or acumen to see the value of social media. They really struggled during that time. But a lot of my colleagues who not only built an audience over, you know, X number of years and then had a strong social media following, a strong web presence, I mean, they did really well during this period. So, you know, it's here to stay. It's been here for a minute. And, you know, those are some of the changes that I've seen that have been really important in engaging people, you know, maintaining business and growing business during this period and moving forward. So those are a few things that I would say that come to mind, come to the mind at the forefront. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, certainly the advent and the promotion of social media to be a means for getting the art out there and seen by more and more people. I thank you for bringing that up. I'm thinking about this very current moment. And of course, this is something that we see predominantly in social media. How do you think, and this is for Najee or Valerie, you can answer this as well, perhaps. How do you see in this particular moment the artwork or the ideas that are really current, moving from the mainstream, from social media, where people are really recognizing the current of what's picking up, maybe moving to collectors' businesses, maybe moving into particular homes. Are people collecting work that's of this moment? And I'm thinking particularly about things that might relate to Black Lives Matter, memorializations of Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. We're certainly seeing this in the popular culture and in social media, as you bring up, that are connecting people to art. Are we seeing people collect representations that are voicing these concerns that are very current?
I could think of some artists that have done really well, addressing current issues like that. And I've seen some collectors acquire works as well. I'm not sure. I think people collect for different reasons, and people, while, we definitely, I would hate to paint a broad brushstroke to say that, hey, just because we're seeing this activity and engagement, we're seeing artists create these images, we are seeing a number of collectors that may pick up a piece. I would hate to say that that it's really changed the dynamic of how people are generally going about collecting. I think I would say, at least from my own personal experience, the advent of portraiture, having more impact in terms of what people are collecting than necessarily socially relevant issues. I mean, artworks that's responding to what's currently going on: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matters. At least from the collectors that I work with and see, myself. But again, this is my experience of from what I'm seeing. There may be other vantage points, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Valerie, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I can also add from my sort of from where I sit. So one of the things that I had the privilege to spearhead for my city, the city of Stamford, was the I curated a Black Lives Matter street mural project in response to the George Floyd murder. And I think, the whole notion of just watching the resurface of protest art across the country, really around the world. Everybody got involved to lend voice to the severity of what we had witnessed using protest art as a vehicle. So one of the things I felt there was an influx of in terms of my work was there was sort of a permissioning with institutions, at least, to have conversations around what had happened, that conversations that are sort of a candid in a real way that hadn't happened before. And a lot of the art that, they had acquired or started asking for to help facilitate some of these conversations was art that was very social justice movement, as I call it, related. So for example, we just helped a group of patent law firms pivot from a on-ground conference to a virtual conference, and they had no idea what they were going to do. Came to us, and we were able to help them infuse this conference with art, primarily from HBCU art collections, where the collections were from law schools that they recruited HBCU students, who were attending these law schools. So we were able to work with the curators and, sort of bring the art from these HBCU law school collections front and center. It was a wonderful experience for the patent lawyers and the likes, but the theme that kept coming up was Juneteenth. And if I had any art, they wanted to know if I had any artwork that reflected Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty loaded, term, because if you think about the meaning of Juneteenth, when the slaves were freed, 2.5 years later, Galveston, Texas, it was about slavery. And I don't think that that's really what they were asking for. So we started talking about, sort of the synonyms that Juneteenth stood for: Jubilee, liberation. And I found myself curating for at least 5 firms, like immediately after that conference. And I'm still getting asked for Juneteenth themed artwork. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I believe it's a direct response to institutions wanting to do something, wanting to have a voice in a politically corporate, correct way, using social movement art, as they would call it, as a vehicle to say, we care, we're going to make a statement about how, you know, what happened wasn't socially acceptable. We're going to include you all more. We're going to include your artwork more. And Valerie, how do we get started?
Well, hey,
so that's my experience in terms of the work I engage in.
I have one quick question though. I mean, I wonder how much of that is, you know, public displays of affection, or, you know, really, because I thought the question was, are people collecting, you know, this material, you know, and as a, you know, I mean, we've got a lot of exhibitions that include, you know, Black Lives Matters, and, you know, people will put them up for public display and public engagement. But in terms of collecting the material, you know, I just wonder, like, even with your event, Val, that they, I mean, was the institution collecting that work, or was it just, you know, a form of public engagement?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, that's a great question. So I'm going to use Murgatroyd until IP law, very specialized area of law. So Murgatroyd is a good example, who not only purchased art, and they purchased it. They had prints framed for their Durham, North Carolina office.
Okay.
They had me ship prints to their clients in San Francisco, in San Jose. I shipped to their clients at Facebook, because these IP lawyers are working for firms like Amazon and Facebook and Google. They work for primarily technology firms. So we were shipping prints all around the country, and the farthest we shipped artwork was Glasgow, Scotland. And it took forever to get the art there, but I, you know, recently had a touch point with the HR department, who said the art's here. We're not cleared to go in because of COVID, but they can't wait to get in and frame the art. So what sort of came out of that for me was, because again, they, you know, sort of the premise was to get them through their gala, which was right on the heels of Black History Month. I have since said, well, wait, what about women's history? Let me send you a catalog. And Najee, you can attest to this, because you are not only in the Black History Month catalog with your art, you're now in the Green Month, because April is Sustainability Month. April 22nd is, you know, it's Earth Day. Companies like Waste Management out of Texas, that's all they do. So they want sustainability artists, as they call them. And guess what? I've served up a fabulous slate, including Black artists, and a lot of questions in the chat. We see you, audience, in the chat. These emerging artists want to know, like, how do they get included? How do they get their art noticed? And I think one of the ways is, you know, you find out what companies like my company, what Najee's company are doing. And if you're out there, if you're a Black artist, if you use, you know, found objects, this is a great month to talk to me, because a lot of companies are doing things for Sustainability Month, Green Month, as we call it. They may not necessarily call for a Black artist, but if you're one who happens to work in that medium, then absolutely find a seat at the table and be included. So Najee, yes, they are purchasing art. Another unique, and I'll wrap after this, but I think it's important, another unique request was to license, not quite an NFT, right? Non-fungible token, not quite that yet, but they wanted to license the right to reproduce a thumbnail for use in their signature. That says, piece of your art in celebration of, and they want, one company I'm working with right now, they want 10 cycles of this across 10 different themed months that they're going to pick, and I have to align artists to those themed months. Signature and an email. They would like to use the art on their LinkedIn page. Okay, reproduction rights, not the copyright. Spreading the word. So it's social impact related, but they're also paying the artists for these rights to reproduce. It's a business transaction, and the artists are making money. Oh. And that's why I'm in it as well, to make sure the artists are, you know, getting a good return on their investment, because I'm not a nonprofit, I'm a for-profit. So it's sort of the private side of the, of the art world. It's different. It's very exciting, and I hope the artists out there become more interested in how it works.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate your talking about this alignment between what organizations or companies are doing monetarily and how that may align with their values. So my next question along that line of thinking is for Gloria. And in thinking about the role that artwork plays in our lives, in terms of our values, in terms of where we put our money and our time and our energy, do you see your collection, your personal collection, as an extension of your values as well as your aesthetic interests? I'm sure you do, but if that's the way you think of it, what are some of the values your artwork expresses? So is it the preservation of traditional ways of making? Is it the celebration of beauty and culture? How would you talk about your collection as being a reflection of your values?
Well, I should preface all of this and talking about it as a collection. I've not been one to really think of it as a collection, because that was not kind of like my intent. I was literally just looking to purchase things that I liked. And I wanted things that were reflective of, Black culture. I wanted things that were beautiful. But that being said, I do tend to have a number of pieces that are preserve culture. I have pottery that is created in the tradition of what early potters did, from Black potters as well as Native American potters, as well as some potters from various Latin cultures as well. I have a lot of textiles that were created by various African tribes, because again, I love the colors, I love the patterns, I love the fact that it is preserving. And yeah, so a lot of it is about presentation. A lot of it is just reflective of, the different cultures, Black cultures and that kind of thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's both possible for both things to be true at the same time. It's both born out of your love for acquiring these objects that you see as important in terms of their craft, in terms of what they celebrate, in terms of, as you say, what they preserve about culture.
Oddly enough, one of the things that I have, my grandmother was a quilter, and I'd always liked the fact that a lot of the traditional patterns in African fabrics, a lot of the African fabric, it seemed to be very jazzy, very random, very improvisational. And I had a couple of quilts, but I have one particular quilt from my grandmother that I had kept in a chest for years. And I picked it up about 2 or 3 months ago, and I looked at it. I didn't realize it's literally as improvisational as you can get. And I never recognized it. I just really liked the fact that my grandmother made it. And I like the colors in it, but it's just very improvisational. And yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, so it has a real personal resonance for you.
Yeah, yes.
So my next question is really both for Valerie and Najee. I've been thinking about how you've been engaged with the arts for years. And so you've been becoming an authority on the professional aspects of building a collection for your clients, and just thinking about it in terms of all the beautiful work that I see behind you now. So how would you advise emerging artists and art lovers, both from the maker and the collector's side, to expand their base of knowledge about entering the marketplace, either beginning their own collection or being collected by others? What would be your advice or your thoughts? What things would you offer people to guide them if they're just venturing into this? I'll go ahead and start with Najee, and then we'll go to Valerie.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think the approach is going to be different depending on if you're talking about the artist and the collector. But since this is primarily focused on the collectors, I would like to kind of start with that. I think you know, some people would say that there are three types of collectors: people that collect for passion, for prestige, and for profit. And oftentimes, you may have some overlap. The majority of the people generally start off that I've worked with, they collect because they're passionate about the material. They've connected with something that, engages them, again, speaks to their value, their political position, or they just love the work. Or sometimes they just love the artist and want to support the artist. You've got, and then those interests, can grow over time. Like I think of a lot of people that started out, being influenced by the old Cosby Show or the artworks that they saw on television. And they may have started out with a print. They may have started out with a mini print. And then next thing you know, they got the bug. They wanted to elevate it and say, oh, I'm gonna get me a limited edition. And then, find a nice small original, to collect. And as time grew, they became more informed. They read more books, maybe talked to collectors, went to a number of different shows, visited some studios. Those are all ways to be engaged and to become a more informed collector. Then, the eye, I know for myself, my eye has developed over time. I see a lot of material. I see a lot of work. I see, work that's derivative from, a lot of the masters and contemporaries that are feeding off of that, and, new folks that's biting off the contemporaries. So it's it grows over time. I think I've done a really good job of kind of filtering, artists that are really, developing and creating something that's unique, bringing something unique to the conversation. Maybe it's a technique, maybe it's subject matter, maybe it's a combination of the material that they use, so on and so forth. And oftentimes those are the artists that we collect. And generally speaking, the majority of the artists that we work with, we've got their work in our collection. Like we bought into their process, the way they think, the way they create, the aesthetics. And we want to support them, and we present them to other collectors. That's how I got started being an art dealer. I was successful traveling the country doing shows, but I realized that people that was collecting my work were collecting other things too. So I wanted to, present to them work that I found very interesting and of high caliber. And it just basically grew from there. So to collectors, I would say, read as much as you can, be engaged, see as much artwork as you can, talk to other people. But, at the end of the day, this is work that you're going to have to live with, and I would much rather work with collectors that kind of help them, just curate something that speaks for them, and not necessarily be completely influenced by what's going on in the marketplace, because tastes change. What's hot today may not necessarily, be worth a fizzle tomorrow. And so, but if you start off with a good basis of finding good work and realizing, the distinction between what this artist brings to the table, what they're doing, how committed they are to their craft, then I think you can, at the end of the day, you can look back 5, 10, 15 years of making some really good decisions and working with some really good people. And then you've built something really, really special, something that you enjoy that could become a legacy for you and your family. So, those are just a few things that come to mind.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I jotted that down. Are people collecting for passion, for prestige, or for profit, or perhaps all three or two of the three? I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. Valerie, that same question for you. What kinds of things would you offer to either emerging collectors or emerging artists who want to be collected?
Yeah, so I definitely echo Najee's sentiments, and that, I think most collectors that I've worked with, myself included, started out as a result of some passion, some level of passion, and passion is multifaceted as well. what attracted me to the art world was my passion to learn more about African-American art history. It was the stories that I found on the canvases of artists that intrigued me. The Great Migration by Jacob Lawrence. That whole, I believe there's 61 panels, just every single one of them. I wanted to know more about what was in his head, what was the temperament of America when Jacob was painting that series, what motivated him to paint that series. Aaron Douglas, the murals that he created, the social statements that artists made, in particular during the Harlem Renaissance period and the WPA for me. I was learning history about my culture. I had a thirst for it. I had a void because I just did not learn a lot about African-American history in the 60s when I was in school. So the passion to learn more about our connected culture. Why are the artists in Texas painting scenes that I thought were specific to the Carolinas? How do they know about these traditions and these customs? And it blew me away. And to Najee's point, you know, as a young collector in my 20s, watching the Cosby Show, there was an entire episode done on Ellis Wilson's funeral procession. That was a beautiful piece. The art in the Huxtable's living room. It put us in a very positive light as Black people. And we wanted more. We wanted to see more of that. So there was an explosion during that late 80s to early 90s. And that's when I signed up to become a distributor. And my sister, my oldest sister, we laugh about it today because I was the one that you knew not to come to sell your jewelry, your Amway, your Tupperware. That's not what I did. And so I let a friend talk me into having a home art show because I had a big living room and deck. And the company showed up, they had easels everywhere. This art blew me away, Toby. And before I knew it, I was in the line over there for people that wanted to become distributors. And I'll never forget the company, president saying to us, you'll form your own business, you have to come up with a name for it, you'll be sole proprietors. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is great. I had the catalog that we were flipping through. And my sister comes over and says, you're actually going to become a distributor? Picture that. And I said, there it is. That's what I'm going to call my business. And I kid you not, as my business grew and as my collecting habits matured, I questioned whether I needed my business name to change and become, Valerie A. Cooper. Most art consultants, the business is their name, but I had such a following. By the time I thought about that, picture that just stayed with me from actually 92 as my part-time little home-based business. And so over the years, I traded in my Carl Wilson's Little Flower and my Ellis Wilson's funeral procession for pieces like the sharecropper. So as an emerging collector, I was taught to find an artist or two or three that had a professional career, that had inventory, whose style I liked. And I was taught this by my mentors in the art world. At the time, there were 3 African-American women dealers that I wanted to be like. June Kelly was one. She had a gallery in Soho. She still does today. Peg Austin was another dealer. She's at Central Park West. And Essie Green, who passed away. But these women were my idols. And so I decided, I put a stake in the ground. In my early 20s, I was going to collect Elizabeth Catlett. She was going to be the woman. She was living at the time. I've met her a few times. She had a big show in New York. I was able to meet her. She was one of our guest artists at the Appraisers Association's conference. I was able to meet her there. She created right on the heels of the WPA movement. And so in the back of me, you will see the sharecropper, the print. So that's my first acquisition ever, lino cut. Russell Goins was the dealer. I would leave work and go to his house every other Friday, which is when we got paid, and take my $500 check. And over time, that $5,000 investment I made was paid for. I'm an accredited African-American art appraiser. That piece now is appraising, you know, I mean, depending on the print and the year, I've seen it anywhere from 25,000 to 50,000. It depends. So that $5,000 investment, I didn't budget for that, but I needed to collect my Elizabeth Catlett. The sculpture, much more significant investment, you know, that I made later on. Dancing is another print in the back of me, a lithograph. And I got to a point where I started collecting work by Elizabeth I didn't quite like so much. Why? Because I would find good deals. She was selling at auction. She was selling well. And there were good investments. So at this point, I'd become more of a mature collector, collecting, yes, out of passion, but also to make money. So the passion to collect what I liked so much, that was important, but it was also important to look for good picks, to find good deals. So I would say to the emerging artists, you know, buy as much original art and original prints as well as your money can afford. I would say, even if it's a local artist who's selling an original piece that you really like, support your local artists. And as you want to learn more about art, read. Social media, the publications, Black Art in America has a nice magazine. They just come out with Sugarcane, Culture Type, Art News, you name it. And the majority publications are writing about Black artists too. It's not just Black publications. You can find information just about anywhere. Listen to your podcasts, SiriusXM, Stitcher. And it's fascinating for me because back in the day when I was trying to learn about it, it wasn't easy to find information. I would literally develop a curriculum, called it African American Art History 101, and then I developed the 102 and started teaching at the local community colleges because it was really, really hard in the late 80s to find, you know, information about the African American art experience. So today that's changed thanks to a lot of scholars and a lot of persons that are out there like myself and Najee. So you don't have to look far anymore to find great art, and don't be afraid to attend an auction. Go to an auction, especially today, you can go online. Go to Sotheby's, go to Christie's, take a seat, understand how the market works. It's a fascinating market. Swan actually has an entire African-American art department. It's the only major house, if you will, majority house, let me say that, with a dedicated African-American art department. And then there's another auction that just formed called, I think it's called, what is it, Najee? Black Auction?
Yeah, Black art auction on majority owned, but focused exclusively on African
art. So look at, you know, there's so many different avenues now. You have your galleries, which are traditional, your art fairs. Go to Basel. Najee and I met at Art Basel. Maybe 14 years ago, he interviewed me. He was down there with his camera and his tripod, and I had been invited to sit on a panel. And we met, I don't know, that the first or second one.
Yeah, it was 2010. That's when we started Black Art in America. Yeah.
Okay, your first year he started, see? And I mean, the rest is history. You would think we were part of a cult down there.
We are.
I don't call it that, but maybe it is. I mean, the way we just come together under the Black art umbrella because of the passion we have for it for different reasons at different levels.
Absolutely. I so appreciate that you talk about the importance of education, that people have to educate themselves to really know and understand. We have a great question that's come in over the chat that I want to ask. We're at about 25 minutes after 7. The hour goes by so quickly. What I want to make sure that I get this in, particularly because you referenced online sources and you talked about, you know, all the different ways that people can get this information, whether they're the maker or the collector. And the question says, could you go into a bit about how to filter through the enormous volume of material on social media and on websites to find promising artists. So then it comes down to, I think, Valerie, you did talk about find that artist that you really, that has, you know, some experience, that has an inventory you mentioned. How does one select that when you have so much out there that's coming at you? How do you winnow it down? How do you narrow it down? And that question's really for all three of you. You know, as you look at art, how do you make that selection? How do you find that unicorn that you really want to start pursuing?
Gloria, you want to kick it off?
Oh, I actually thought that it was going to be a question, and I just like went totally. I just like I wasn't even focusing. I'm sorry, but and I may not answer your question, but there was something that I had in mind that I kind of wanted to say. One means that I use to find artists and to find artwork. Whenever I would go on vacation, I would look for galleries, and I would go to visit the galleries and to see what the galleries had. So when I was in Montreal, I went to galleries in Montreal. When I was in Toronto, I'd find a gallery, and and I've collected art from, galleries in Montreal as well as in Toronto. We used to go down south a lot. And so I went to the Red Piano 2 Art Gallery. They aren't around anymore, but they sell Black art. There's a gallery in Charleston, South Carolina, Chuma. I found some artists at Chuma. Festivals. There's Essence Festival. I started collecting 2 artists I found at Essence Festival because they would feature Black artists. The National Black Arts Festival. I'd gone to that. There's another festival in Columbia, Maryland, the Capitol Jazz Festival. They have, Black artists. So, so you can just, be out, doing something totally different and find, artists that you like. I actually started collecting an artist from a calendar. I bought a calendar, and I found an artist that, I like this artist's work. And, but I will look at various, I'm adventurous, I guess I should say. And so, so I've found artists in that way as well. So it's just up to the individuals,
I like that you bring up that there doesn't have to be a distinction between sort of high culture and low culture, or kinds of media that one might consider as part of fine art or not. So we have about 2 minutes left. And in that really short time, I wanted to ask a question and see if I can get a brief answer from each of you. What would be, if you can think about this just a sec, what would be the best piece of art advice that you've ever received in relationship to your interest in the arts? So what's the best piece of advice that you think you ever got in your career that maybe propelled you forward? Let's start with Najee, and then we'll go to Gloria, and then wrap up with Valerie.
Toby, I don't know. I think I'm such a individualist. I just kind of do me and what moves my spirit. I wish I had some time to really go into that last question, because the advice that I would have gave would, in terms of filtering, would have been your gallerists, your museums, collectors that you respect their collection, being mentors, and also other artists. Nobody knows art better than artists, right? So find some artists that you really admire and respect their work, and ask them, like, hey, who should I be looking out for? And I think those things, and as well as collectors that's been collecting, because they've made a journey, and they made some mistakes and some things that they probably would change over time, are all great resources. So best advice: enjoy the process, get active, get at it. So.
That's perfect, because I absolutely agree with you. Artists drive the bus, right? So that's where you start. Gloria, do you have a best piece of advice that you have or would like to share?
Not really. I would just say, don't be afraid, and trust your taste. because you're going to be the person who's going to have to live with the pieces. So, you know, trust your taste.
Absolutely. Valerie, last word. You get the last word here. Most valuable.
So I think the best piece of advice I learned very early on in terms of building my collection, because I think as a young collector, it seemed out of reach financially. I thought, oh no, I need a lot of money. But right away, the dealers taught me, you don't have to have all the money at once.
Right.
I didn't quite call it a layaway plan. But like I said, sharecropper, I go uptown to Russell Goins' home-based studio. He's one of the biggest beard dealers in the country, by the way. And you work something out. You work something out. So the gallerists and the dealers will meet you where you are. And then one of the first artists whose work I started selling many years ago, Frank Frazier, he also taught me you can barter. You don't even have to exchange money. What else he would say? What else do you have? You give me your computer and I'll give you some of my art, right? So it's a very fluid and industry that's full of negotiations. You gotta be careful, but have fun, make deals, do deals, barter, pay in installments, go to the auctions, you know, learn more about how the different facets of it work, because the gallery business is very different from the dealer business, is very different from the auction business. And it's just a wonderful world to be a part of. And that's how I'd wrap it up.
Yeah, many art worlds, and be creative in all of those worlds. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I'm going to ask our panelists to stay online. Please don't disconnect right away. But for our audience or those who have to depart right now, it's just a little past 7:30. I want to thank you and extend thank yous to Gloria, Najee, and Valerie most of all, and to Arts Worcester for being here today and for talking with us about the vitality of Black art and artists. Thank you very much. Goodbye all, and our panelists will stay online. Thank you.